Hey patrons, I hope you're having a wonderful day. It's time for another video tutorial, another beginner level tutorial, and this time we will be painting my favorite fruit, cherries. Let's get started right away. First, let's grab our reference image, which you can also download because I'll just attach it to the post. If you want to have your reference image in a separate window, what you'll need to do is swipe up from the bottom of your screen so you get this bar of apps, and you can just drag your favorite app to the side of your screen to open it up. Well, of course it'll have to work. Yeah, there it is. You can just drag it to the side of your screen to open it up. So there I have my cherries, and the canvas that we're using is 3500 pixels by 3500 pixels. And let's first start out with a sketch. I'll go to the illustration brush set and use the Sketch It brush. But if you don't have this set, you can also just use the HB pencil, for example. And I'll just grab a gray color. And let me just zoom out a little bit. And I'll just start out sketching these cherries. Well, of course, they are a bit rounded. We have two, and I'll also think about the angles a little bit. I'm making pretty much angular shapes at the start, trying to think about the size of the object and, well, how big each cherry is, where do they touch. What's the angle of these stems? And these are cherries, so you don't have to match with the reference image exactly. We just want this to look like cherries. And we don't have to see if this cherry is Fred and if that's Veronica. These are just cherries and not people, so no one will notice if they look slightly different from the reference image, of course. Now we'll add in this little leaf. And we'll also be practicing painting water droplets in this video. Because one of you asked me a while back how to approach painting water droplets. And also one of you asked me if I would do a cherry video. And I thought, why not combine those two? Paint some cherries and add water droplets as well. And of course then you can apply this technique to an apple or, well, to skin in a portrait. I just think painting fruit is, well, and any food is just a great way to practice your drawing and painting skills. We have that stem that's coming out from here. And I'm starting to make more rounded shapes now. So we went from those angular shapes to more rounded shapes. Let me just use the arrow to move them around a little bit. I want to make it a little bit smaller. Like this. I think this is a good start for our cherries. Now let me duplicate this layer, and this is not something that you need to do, but I just want to save the process for you. So this is step 1, that's the sketch, and I'll just turn that off. And now I will make a new layer underneath the sketch. So I'll click the plus to make a new layer, and these two together, that will be step 2. So we have the sketch here. And I'll make a painting. I'll use this layer underneath that. Sorry, I'm trying to say like 10 things at the same time. So I made this new layer underneath the sketch layer, and this will be the painting layer. And you can turn down the opacity of the sketch a little bit, so it'll be more transparent and you will be able to see the painting layer better. And now let's start with the smooth lines brush. And if you don't have this brush set, you can use the monoline brush, which is in Procreate already. Now let's pick a base color for our cherries. I will also be making a color palette for you, but if you want to get more practice out of this, then you can try to create your own colors. I think this will be a nice base color. A nice deep red. And let's just draw those basic shapes of the cherries. And I'm sorry that my nails aren't exactly matching with the colors of the cherries. But I do have this tiny little apple on my nail. I'm not sure if you can see it, which also doesn't match a cherry, of course, but it's fruit and it's what I had. So I thought it would be fun. So let's start with those base colors. And I'm gonna make the brush a bit bigger. Maybe 36. Yeah, that's nice. But nail polish, that's really something that kind of grew on me because of the whole YouTube videos and that people seem to like it. That I try to match the polish with the subject. But before all that, I really never wore nail polish. And I actually don't have the patience to wait until the polish is dry. I hate waiting. I hate not being able to use my hands. So yeah, it often looks a bit messy. I can see that my thumb, it's totally messed up already because I hold my pen in such a weird way. So don't blame me. The other cherry. And you can just switch to the eraser to erase some parts if needed. Cleaning it up. Seriously, I painted these nails like 2 hours ago. And I'm still messing them up. Can't believe it. Okay, well, let's make a new layer on top of these on top of this cherry layer. And on this one, I will be laying down the base color for the stem. So let's go to a greenish color. Perhaps a bit like this. I'll make the brush a little bit smaller, perhaps 25. Now let me go up with the opacity. I want to see those stems. We can also lower the opacity of those cherries a little bit, just so we can see that sketch better. And that other one. Now we can turn up the opacity of the cherries again. And let's get this part of the stem. I'll just cover it with the green. That's okay. And let's put that leaf on a separate layer as well. I'll go for a bit different color there. And fill it. Alright, so now we have all those base colors. Let me lower the sketch again a bit. You know, let me just save this progress and duplicate this here. So if you download my file, you can check it out and take a closer look. So we'll go to step 3. So now we have those cherries, the stems, and the leaf on separate layers. And the reason I did that is because this way it's easier to work on these parts separately, because, well, it's just handy to be able to paint on these stems behind that leaf and to be able to paint on that leaf without touching those stems. And the same goes for the cherries themselves. You don't have to worry about that little stem. And I see that it's a bit messy, so I'll use the eraser here to clean that up. But you can also do this at a later stage very easily. Well, let me just lower the opacity of the sketch layer a bit more. Or, you know, let's just turn it off. Let's just remove it here. And let's get started with the cherry layer. I will use Alpha Lock on this layer. That way, the pixels that are on this layer right now, they are locked. We won't be able to paint in the transparent parts, in those parts that have this checkerboard pattern. You can't paint there, you can only paint on the cherries. So let me grab the basic flow brush right now so we can drop in some more color. I want some brighter reds, saturated red, perhaps something like this. Ooh, the brush is very small. Let me make it bigger to around 70%. And you can see that this lower part of that cherry, that's a bit brighter. You can see saturated reds there. So I'll just roughly put some color there. Put some of that brighter red. And on this side as well. It's a bit less bright than the cherry on the left, but still you can see some of those bright reds. And did I drop it in? No, it's not there yet. And let me also grab a very dark color, because right here where these cherries touch, that's very dark. I'm just focusing on those dark areas right now. Drop that in as well. Let me just, no, I won't move the colors. Someone said that it's very disturbing when I start moving around the colors in the color palette, so I'll just leave them here. Let me grab a very light color now, because you can see it's almost whitish. perhaps a bit like this. So we can add some light parts to that cherry. And to the side here. Roughly laying in those highlights as well. And this is kind of that point where even I think, oh my, this looks so messy. It doesn't look like cherries at all yet. How am I going to fix this? How am I going to make this work? But just continue building up that contrast, building up those shapes, and eventually it will start looking like real cherries. It's just a gradual process. So this is like really blurry, ugly looking cherries, but it's a start. Now let's also add some more colors to those stems. So we'll go to that layer and use Alpha Lock here as well. Oh, and let me drop in this light color that we just used. And for the stems, I also want to go lighter, a bit towards yellowish, perhaps something like this, and add some lighter parts. And you see, it's so handy that we have Alpha Lock turned on and that we have these separate layers so we won't be painting over that leaf. Let me drop it in and let me grab some color for that top. Guess something like this. As a base, and some yellows, oranges. Make the brush a bit smaller. It's 22% right now. And let's also grab this bright red that we used earlier. Yes, and now we'll go to that leaf. And again, use Alpha Lock, so we will only be able to paint on the leaf itself. Now, let me pick a lighter green, maybe like this. I'll go to around 70% again. And I'm just dropping in some color variation. You don't have to think about any detail at this point. Let me drop that in. Alright, I think we can go to the next phase right now. So I'll duplicate this group again. And this is not something that you need to do unless you want to save your own progress, of course. Now let's start adding more detail, refine these shapes a bit more on our layers. And we'll start with the cherries. Now first of all, let me use the smudge tool. And we'll just use the standard blender, which you can find in the basic flow brush pack. And let's set it to around 35%, I guess. And let me just smudge some areas, blend some parts a little bit. I'll do the same for the cherry on this side. And let me use the eraser set to the basic flow brush to just work on these edges a little bit. I find them too harsh. And using the basic flow brush as an eraser, it'll create some, yeah, slightly softer looking edges. Just a little bit. It's very subtle. And using alpha lock on a layer, you can't paint on the transparent parts, but you can erase parts that are already there. But of course, as soon as they are gone, you can't paint there anymore. You can see I have some wobbly lines here. I'll just fix that a little bit. The cherries, they must be one of my favorite types of fruit. I also like strawberries a whole lot, but cherries, once I start eating them, I just can't stop. I have had so many occasions where I had so many cherries that I just got, I started feeling really sick and nauseous. It's too bad that they have this, what's it called? A stone inside. If they didn't have that, then I would eat even more. I think we just need to lighten up some parts, especially around those edges. I'll zoom in a little bit and let me grab, first I want to add some texture actually. Let me zoom out. Let me go to the illustration brush pack and let's use the grunge rock brush. I'll pick this dark color. Let me see. Yeah, I like that. Gonna make it a little bit bigger. The brush is 80%. Opacity is at 40%. And I'll just go over the cherry to add a little bit of that texture. Yeah, that's nice. And now I want to add a more bright, what's it called? Saturated red. I want to add a more saturated red. I'll use the overlay brush for that. Pick that red. Let's see, how big is the brush? Well, let's go for around 35% and go over these cherries. Yeah, to add some of that red. Yeah, that's nice. Alright, now let me grab the multiply brush. And I'll just pick this very dark red. And the brush is at 5% right now. Let me see if that's nice. Yeah. And I'll just add some dark parts. Work on those a little bit more. And on this side. Alright, and now for the lighter parts. We can actually use the lighten brush for that. Let me grab this light pink again. And let's work on those light edges. I'll make the brush a bit bigger, around 50%. I'll go over that edge to create that light effect. Make it a bit smaller as well for that edge. You can just vary up the size. I'll go smaller again for the smaller details. Okay, it's already starting to look more like a realistic looking cherry. Let's go to the other one. Add some of those highlights as well. I can also see some light here. And here near the top. And just varying up the size of the brush as I go. Where I need to lighten up bigger areas, I'll make it bigger. And where I need to do small parts, I'll make it smaller. Now let's go to those stems. And let's again use that Crunch Rock brush in the illustration brush set. Let me just pick a darker green over there. And then glaze over with the Crunch Rock brush. And we can also pick some of that yellowish orange. Go a bit lighter. And let's use that as well. Just to add some texture. Yeah, I like that. And we can use the darken line brush. And let's just pick a local color. Oh, I'm almost dropping my pen. Let's see, the size is at around 10%. And let's work on this part a little bit. Adding some texture there. And I can see a little tiny highlight there. I want to add that too. I'll use the light and line brush for that. I'll just pick the local color here. Make it a bit bigger, around 10%. And I'll just add a little highlight. Add a little bit here as well. Alright, and now let's switch to that leaf. So we'll go to that layer. And you know, let's use the grunge rock brush there as well. I'll grab a lighter color. I'll just go over it. Adding some different colors, maybe a dark green. Maybe some of this light green as well, just play around with that texture. And now I want to switch to the light and line brush to add, well, that light line on the leaf. Just go from this part all the way to the end. And we can make some lines going outward. I'll go to 6%. And just add some leafy texture. I'm going to switch to the yellow. You can add a lighter line to that outside of the leaf. You can see that in the image. Just going along the edge. Maybe some more texture. I think this is enough for this step. Let's move on to the next. I will duplicate this group again. And again, you don't have to do that unless you want to save your progress. And let's start adding a drop shadow now. That'll definitely add something to our painting, make it look more realistic. So as you can see, I have just created a new layer and I want that to be below the cherries but in the same group. So right now it's in the group below the cherries and I will use the basic flow brush now. And let's just pick this very dark color right here. And I want to make the brush a bit smaller, maybe around 40%. And this shadow, it is very close to those cherries. Very close. Let's go even a bit darker. Pick this. And to make it a bit softer, you could go to the magic wand and use the Gaussian blur. Like that. Now we're softening that shadow a little bit. I'm at around 10%. And then you can just start painting on top of it again. To make that shadow the deepest, right where that cherry is touching the surface. I think this looks nice. Let's go back to the cherries. I want to use the lighten brush again, because I want to add a little bit of light to that underside right here. When you have something like cherries lying on top of a white surface with, well, like in this case, with studio lights surrounding it, the light will bounce on that white surface and reflect on that underside of the cherries. So you can see some reflected light at the bottom here. And adding that in your painting will really add to the realism. I also want to work more on these really bright highlights, and I want to use the lighten line brush for that. Let's start off with that one. Make the brush a bit bigger. It's at 22% right now. And I'll play around with the size, go smaller as well to make tiny little specks in this highlight as well. Let's go a bit brighter. And make sure that you zoom out every once in a while to take a look at it. I want to make this a little bit bigger. And you can also use the smudge tool in between passes to soften some parts up a little bit. And then go back to your brush to add smaller specks, smaller details. And you can also use this brush for some smaller highlight details here around that stem. Now let's go to that other cherry. add some brighter highlight right here. Let me use the smudge tool in between. Maybe we can grab one of the brushes from the illustration brush set. Let me use the rough spackles. To create some spackly highlight here. Yeah, that works nicely. Now I'll go back to the light and line brush again. This part. And use the smudge tool to soften it. And you can also switch back to that spackle brush, the rough spackles, to add some spackles here as well. Alright, and back to the light and line brush for some smaller details. Some more work on these highlights here. Okay, they already look tastier. Let's zoom out a little bit. I want to add a little bit of that brighter red again. So I'll switch to the overlay brush and grab a bright red. Make the brush, well, around 17%. Maybe a bit smaller. 7. Let's add some brighter red like here. And see some saturated parts. And I think at this point we can start adding those water droplets. Of course, you can continue tweaking your cherries, adding more detail, but it's supposed to be a beginner tutorial. I hope it's not too complicated. But yeah, just make sure that if you zoom out like this, that you recognize cherries. That's the most important part. You don't have to focus on the details. And now let's add those water droplets to make them look extra fresh. We go to the layers. Let's just check the difference of our last step. You see, we added that drop shadow. We made those highlights more intense. And now finally, let's add those droplets. So we're at step 6. Those water droplets, we'll be adding those on a separate layer. So let's make a new layer on top of that cherry layer. And let's zoom in a little bit. Now for the brush, I would like to grab let's use the smooth lines brush again. But any brush that has a sharp looking edge would be fine. Let's check this cherry out first. And I'll grab a dark color. I'll drop that in. Well, it's pretty much the same as that other color, but doesn't really matter. And let's just draw in some droplets. Well, the brush is pretty big right now. Let's make it smaller, maybe 8%. You know, let me grab the tapered lines brush instead. Sorry about that. Go to 7%. Let me just make some basic shapes for these droplets. Let me go even smaller, maybe 3%. And there are many ways that lead to Rome when it comes to creating droplets. And this is just a way in which you can create them. So right now I'm just focusing on the shapes of these droplets, just creating some random shapes. Well, not totally random, but some that look a bit like these droplets that you can see on the cherry. And I'm not going to make them all. You can create as many droplets as you like, of course. Let's make a long one here. And yes, it looks super weird right now. But we'll be fixing that later. So for now, all you have to do is focus on the shape of those droplets. Just going to make a few. And on the other cherry as well. I think I'll just keep it at, well, at these droplets. And now that we have these basic shapes for these droplets, we can start using alpha lock on this layer, so we will only be able to paint on these droplet shapes. And that's very handy. But now I'll grab the basic flow brush. And I'll just grab some local colors for this one. I want to add some red here as well. I'll just start painting some red of that base cherry color here as well. Oh, that's a bit too much. And on those as well. Still looking weird, but we'll get there. Of course, we also need those highlights on these water droplets. I'll still use the basic flow brush, but I've made it a bit smaller. I'm at 2%. just to add some subtle highlights right now near those top parts. And for this one, just a little bit of light at the top. And of course you can also use the smudge tool while you have alpha lock turned on. You can smudge some areas a little bit. And only the pixels that are already on the layer will get smudged. Let's go to this side. I'll use the basic flow brush again. Let me add a little bit of the bright light on these droplets. So I can use the overlay brush again and that bright red, and I can just go over these droplets to add some of that saturated red. Now let me switch to the darken line brush. I'll zoom in again and let me add, well, while picking a local color here, let me add a dark edge to that underside of the droplets. But the thing with droplets like this is that, well, you can see some soft transitions inside of that droplet and also some hard transitions, and the outside has a pretty crisp edge. So make sure that you keep an eye on that. You can clearly see that line between that droplet, and of course in some areas like right there you can't really see it, but there are parts on that droplet where you do see that edge, and that's what'll make it look like a droplet. And also those bright highlights that you see, those white highlights. And observing something like that, looking at the highlights, at the edges, it's something that you can do throughout your day, even when you're not drawing. You can look at objects and think about what makes the object look, well, the way it does. What makes metal look like metal, for instance? What does a certain fabric, what does it, well, what makes it look like that fabric? How do you recognize it? How does the light behave? Are there any reflections? How is the surrounding light influencing the object? So you don't even have to draw or paint to study. All right, now it's time for those highlights. I'll use the light and line brush for that. Let me just pick a very light color. And you can see that bright, well, let me go smaller, 8%. A very bright edge. I'll go even smaller, maybe 5%. Making droplets like this using the alpha lock tool, it really gives you a lot of control over your droplets. You see, when you zoom out, it already looks a lot more like droplets. So don't stay zoomed in all the time. Make sure that you take a look from a distance to check the effect that you're creating. Sometimes things may look a bit weird from up close. When you zoom out, it looks a lot better. Just trying to make some really simple droplets here. Here we can see a bright highlight again. Don't be afraid to put that in there. There, now we have some water droplets on our cherries. I just want to give a final touch. Let's make a slight reflection of these cherries on that white surface which they are standing on. Standing or lying, not sure what they're doing. Sitting. What do objects do, or fruit? I'm sorry. Let's just do it. Okay. To do that, we'll have to duplicate our layers. Yeah, to do that, let's group these and just duplicate that group. Now I can just merge this cherry layer and I'll place it underneath our group. And we'll go to the arrow and use flip. What? Did I double flip it? What? Oh yeah, there it is. I don't know what happened there. It did a double flip. Okay, and let's move it down. Oh, first, sorry, let's turn on magnetics so we can make sure that it's going down properly. And let's place them like this. And now we can lower the opacity of that layer. I think 35. Yeah, that's nice. And now let's add a layer mask on this layer. So click the layer, go to mask, and let's grab the soft brush which you can find under airbrushing and set it to black. I have the opacity set to 40%. Size is 13%. Not sure if that's too small. Yeah, let's make it a bit bigger. Maybe around 25, 24. Now let's go over this lower side to make something of a gradient on that mask. Just so we have a really slight reflection. That does give it an extra touch. Now go ahead and create your own cherries, add more water droplets, more details to them, because this is really a great exercise when you're practicing painting digital. Let me make this one bigger. I hope you enjoyed following this cherry tutorial. If you have any suggestions for future tutorials, you can always drop a comment, send me a message. I really try my best to make everything that you want, but yeah, it's a bit much. So I do my best to keep everyone happy and make all the tutorials that you want, but I can't promise anything. I'll soon be making a fully color portrait painting though, so that's coming up. I also want to do a space scene that has also been requested often. I'll also be doing another still life, video, landscapes, lots more. Yeah, a lot is coming. So yeah, I'll just keep you updated. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope you are having a wonderful day. Talk to you soon here at Patreon. Thanks for watching.